Hey, true crime fans! Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free true crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free true crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
The most powerful designer drugs are the digital ones we use daily. And we get high off them. One touch, tap, like, scroll at a time. You know, just like tech creators want us to. Use digital without digital using you. Learn more at sync.ithra.com.
Hello and welcome to mini episode 390 of Real Life Ghost Stories, and I have one spooky story for you today, and our story comes from August the 7th, 2024, and today's story comes from Donna. I grew up terrified of everything paranormal, but that didn't stop me from being interested in it. From the Loch Ness Monster to UFOs to spontaneous human combustion, whatever it was, I believed in it all. I just didn't want to ever witness or experience it myself. Ghosts were the supernatural beings that scared me the most. My belief in them was no doubt reinforced by my spooky aunt Ernestine, who, along with her husband Emmett and their daughter Carol, lived in a haunted house less than a mile away from my childhood home. Ernestine's stories were terrifying to me. Stories such as ghost children jumping up and down on the bed, Emmett waking up to feel cold feet in the bed next to him, feet which were not Ernestine's, or Carol seeing the shower handles turn by themselves, spraying her with water when she was taking a bath. And it wasn't just them. The previous family that lived there, so the story went, fled in the middle of the night and never went back to get their things. Suffice to say, I was not comfortable visiting their house. If ghosts were real, as I supposed they must be based on her stories, I definitely didn't want to come into close proximity. I didn't ever see a ghost at Ernestine's house, but unfortunately I haven't entirely avoided them. After hearing you reading my blimp story on mini episode 331 and giving you the ick, I decided to make it up to you by sending you stories that are not UFO related. So here are my only 3 personal ghost stories, presented chronologically from my childhood to early adulthood to middle age. All are as accurate as I can recall, but the names have all been changed for privacy. That said, here are my stories. The Flying Spectre. One summer my family drove from Virginia to visit my Aunt Janet in New Jersey for vacation. We had not been there before. She and her family had only recently returned from Germany, where her husband was stationed in the military. They had partitioned a section of their basement into a spare bedroom for visiting family. This bedroom was set up like an army barracks, with several twin beds lined up on one side of the long room. Between the foot of the beds and the opposite wall was a space wide enough for a walkway with a few chairs situated along the wall. There was an adjoining bathroom at the far end of the bedroom. My 2 sisters and I were assigned to sleep in this room, and I took the cot closest to the bathroom. With the overhead lights off and with no windows, the room was very dark. We left the light on in the bathroom and closed the door so that some light leaking out underneath would keep the room from being completely dark. I took off my glasses and put them on a stool next to me. I went to sleep quickly because we had travelled a long way and I was worn out. I don't know how long I had been asleep, but at some point I woke up and opened my eyes and was immediately alarmed by the sight of a glowing white figure flying back and forth in front of me at the foot of my bed. As expected, I was terrified. I tried to scream, but I couldn't make a noise. I frequently had sleep paralysis as a kid, but this did not feel like my normal sleep paralysis, in which I was just not able to move. This felt like I could move, but I was too scared to be able to yell for help. Hoping I was dreaming, I closed my eyes and reopened them, but it was still there, flying back and forth rapidly in the space between the foot of my bed and the opposite wall. Here was proof that ghosts actually did exist, and I was sure I was going to die of fright at that moment. It was then that I realised I could feel my eyes moving back and forth. I closed them tightly to verify this, and they were definitely moving very quickly back and forth as if I was in REM sleep and I was dreaming. So I squinched them tightly closed and concentrated hard on stopping them from moving. After a while, they finally stopped. When I reopened them, all I saw was a bright white, unidentifiable thing sitting motionless on the chair across from my bed. I grabbed my glasses and immediately identified it as a jacket draped on the chair at the foot of my bed, caught in the light from the bathroom door, which had cracked open a bit. It took a while for my heart rate to slow and for me to calm down enough to try and go back asleep. But the relief that I felt at finding my ghost was not paranormal was immense. This event remains one of the scariest things I've ever seen, at least while I thought it was a ghost. And although I continued to have sleep paralysis until I was an adult, that was the only time I ever experienced rapid eye movement with my eyes open. The lurking boss. This story requires a little background. After I graduated from college with a fine arts degree in painting and printmaking, I realised I needed to get an actual job with a weekly paycheck. I found one working at the local daily newspaper in a department called news production. This job was to paste up the news pages, which basically involved using hot wax to stick news stories and photos onto large sheets of paper so they could be photographed to make the printing plates for each page of the paper. It didn't require a lot of skill, but having an eye for straight lines was helpful. My boss was Bobby. He hired me because my twin sister was working in the ad production department there, a similar job just dealing with ads instead of news. And he said he wanted one of her in his department. Bobby was a man with a colourful history, to say the least. Born in Arkansas, he had a thick southern accent with a country twang. He was a convicted felon, having spent time in jail for grand theft auto. Love and hate were tattooed across the knuckles of his two hands. I kid you not. He had ridden the rails as a hobo and almost died once when the train car he was in was put onto a sidetrack and locked while he was passed out drunk in it. A preacher driving nearby apparently had a weird feeling when he saw the train car there and checked it out, just in time to save Bobby's life. Bobby had become the manager of the news production department after he crossed a picket line during a strike in the 1970s. I was hired in the 1980s, but newspapers were still a wild and woolly workplace then. Before I started working there, Bobby was known to hand out quaaludes to employees. By the time I got there in the mid-80s, he was still smoking marijuana in his office, where he would sit and gab with his management team. Sometimes he'd pull in an employee to talk to him when there wasn't much to do. One of my co-workers called it being sucked into the black hole. Sometimes, or should I say often, he would just lurk around the work tables watching us work. I never really trusted him, but he never messed with me and seemed to like my work ethic. He promoted me as soon as he could. Bobby's assistant manager was Samuel, and Samuel was a different sort of beast from Bobby. He'd been an employee at the newspaper for 40 years, starting as a paper boy when he was young, and had worked his way up. He was a native of the newspaper's town, same as me, and had actually gone to high school with my father in the 1940s. Samuel had been an alcoholic most of his life, and when he wasn't drunk, he was literally the meanest man on earth, and a horrible racist to boot. A few years before I was hired, Samuel had almost died of cirrhosis of the liver. While in the hospital, he had a vision of God hovering over him in the bed. He promised God he would never touch a drop of alcohol again if he would just let him live. Well, Samuel survived. But because he had sworn to God he wouldn't drink again, he became the meanest man alive full time. Bobby and Samuel had a love-hate relationship. They bickered like an old married couple but hung out together outside of work. This is in spite of the fact that Samuel had had an affair with Bobby's wife, which may have had something to do with why Bobby got divorced. After Samuel gave up drinking, Bobby couldn't stand him being the meanest man alive at all times, so he turned Samuel on to marijuana. This probably wasn't what God had in mind for the deal he had made, and so it wasn't many years later that Samuel got cancer and died, and I was promoted into Samuel's position. Then, about a year later, Bobby died too. A co-worker called the police when Bobby didn't show up for work, and they found him in his apartment dead from who knows what cause. And yes, I was promoted into Bobby's position too. And this is where my ghost story starts. Shortly after Bobby's death, I had a dream that I was on the work floor and I saw Bobby standing there looking lost. He was wearing his standard work outfit, leather shoes, baggy khaki trousers, and a white button-down shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and no tie. In the dream, Samuel came around the corner and approached Bobby. He walked right up to him, put his hands on Bobby's shoulders and said, "You're dead, Bobby. It's time to go." Then they were both enveloped in a shaft of bright golden light that seemed to come from above, and I watched as they vanished in it. A dream, I know, but it left me with a really strange feeling that I've never been able to define. I'm not a religious person, but it felt like they had been pulled out of our existence and into another realm. As time went on, nothing else very weird happened. Every now and again, there would be a fly pestering us on the work floor and someone would joke that it was Bobby or Samuel. There wasn't a lot of love lost on either of them. Then one day, about 3 years after Bobby died, I was standing next to my friend Joan at a work table, where we were talking about one of the pages she was pasting up. The table we were standing at was in the middle of a row of about 8 to 10 tables, all lined up together. Each table was about 6 feet wide, so someone would have to walk for about 25 feet on the linoleum tiles from either end to reach us. There was no space between any of the tables, so no one could walk between them. Someone on the other side of the tables would have to go to the end of the line to our left as we faced the tables. The end of the row to our right was capped by another workstation with no room to pass around it. At that end, the hall led to an adjoining hallway on the left that ended after about 25 feet with a door to the press room stairs. Behind us, the walkway we stood on separated us from a computer imaging room that was as long as the row of tables. This room had windows its whole length, and there were no doors on that side. We could see that no one was inside the room at that time. As Joan and I were standing there facing the table with our backs to the wall with windows, we both suddenly got a creepy feeling like we were being watched. It was like someone was standing directly behind us. Neither of us turned around completely, but we both simultaneously turned our heads towards the space behind us with our eyes looking down at the floor. I saw a pair of leather shoes and the pant legs of baggy khaki trousers. I scanned up just a little and could see the bottom of a white button-down shirt. I did not want to look any further up. I had no doubt that it was Bobby. It looked and felt just like I remembered him. I turned my gaze back to the work table for a second, then looked behind me again, but he had gone. After a second, I tentatively asked Joan if she had seen what I had just seen. She immediately said, "You mean Bobby?" We completed each other's sentences describing what we had seen, and we had both seen exactly the same thing. There was absolutely no way anyone could have suddenly been behind us without hearing them walk towards us. We even ran down the hall to make sure there wasn't someone walking away. There was no one at all in that part of the building. I never saw him again, but I'm convinced it was him, lurking behind us for old time's sake. The Dome House Ghost. Just before the pandemic began, my family decided to spend the winter solstice weekend at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. We looked at various rental houses in the area and I found a geodesic dome, which was just quirky enough to pique our interests. It was also appealing because our elderly dog wasn't able to climb the steps any longer, and this home had no entry steps. although it technically had 3 stories inside. It was in a wooded subdivision with a few homes and gravel roads. Plus, it was only about 30 minutes away from the town by car. The first thing we noticed on our arrival was a large 2-story mural in the living room, directly across from the front door. It covered the wall behind a wood-burning stove, all the way up to the top of the dome, where the long stovepipe vented out. It depicted a sort of vertical view of a seascape, with waves and boats, done in a graphical Japanese style, akin to Hokusai's Great Wave. The wood stove was in the middle of the wall that bisected the first floor of the basically circular house. Just to the right of the stove was a door to a bedroom and a bathroom suite. To the left of that stove, the wall ended at a wide opening to the kitchen, which was connected to the other side of the bathroom. The living room boasted 2 other strange features. On the left side near the kitchen was a hatch-like door in the floor that opened to a kind of stair ladder leading to a basement room. The only other access to that level was a locked door outside. Going down these stairs was precarious, but the pool table was down there, so we used it some. But since our dog couldn't make the trip down the stair ladder, we mostly stayed out of it. On the right side of the living room, there was a metal spiral staircase leading to a bedroom suite on the upper level, in the back half of the house behind the centre wall. Our adult kid took the upstairs bedroom, and my husband and I took the bedroom on the main floor. In addition to the mural, the house was filled with a lot of weird paintings, presumably created by the owner or someone in his family. Strange artworks were hung everywhere throughout the house, even in the bathrooms, and some large family portraits were stuffed in the upstairs bedroom closet. The house was decidedly odd. The creepy art, the basement room with the crazy stairs, and just its overall dome shape. Plus the house smelled like mould throughout. But we were only going to be there for a couple of days, mostly to sleep, so we just accepted it all. Around dinner time the first night we were there, we were all in the kitchen talking. Our kid was behind me and past me, and kind of blanched and said, "I thought I saw something behind you." It was fleeting, and they couldn't say if it was a weird trick of the light or an actual figure. I got a chill though, and I think I said something along the lines of, "Whatever it was had better leave us alone." After a night playing board games, we all went to bed. I got to sleep easily, but in the middle of the night I had an unsettling dream. It isn't rare for me to dream about being in bed in my bedroom at home, but this is the only dream I can recall where I dreamed of the bedroom I was in somewhere else. In the dream, I was laying in the bed exactly where I was in reality. The bed faced the door to the living room and the wall directly behind the wood-burning stove. In my dream, I woke up in bed and looked at the door. Towards the top of the door, I saw a long, creepy hand slowly emerging from the living room side of the door, grabbing the door frame inside the bedroom and coming stealthily into the bedroom. Based on the position of the hand, whoever belonged to it would need to have been taller than an average human, and they would have had to be standing exactly where the wooden stove was, which was impossible. This dream terrified me so much that I immediately woke up. I was still in bed and looking at the door exactly as I had been in the dream. The hand was gone, but suddenly at that exact moment there was an incredibly loud banging noise coming from behind the wall where the wood stove was. It was an incessant and repetitive banging that lasted for a good 5 or 10 seconds. My heart was beating so fast I thought it would burst. It was as if the house had woken up and its heart was beating as fast as mine was after the dream. The sound seemed to be coming from the wood stove itself, and it reverberated up the ventilation pipe to the top of the dome. I've heard radiators banging before, but this wasn't a radiator. It was just a wood stove, which we hadn't even used. When it finally stopped, I looked over and saw my husband had slept through it. I had expected it to wake the entire house. My dog was asleep on the floor next to the bed, and no one in the house seemed to have heard anything except for me. It wasn't easy getting back to sleep after that. It felt like there was something in the house that had wanted its presence known. I regretted making the earlier remark in the kitchen, since this felt like a response to my demand that it leave us alone. Fortunately, nothing else spooky happened during the remainder of our stay in the house. In the morning, we went into Harper's Ferry, with the intention of walking across the train bridge to hike the Appalachian Trail, a short way into Maryland. But when we got into town, we found out a train had derailed on the bridge during the early morning hours, cutting the trail off from hikers. If that had happened when any hikers were crossing, they would have been killed. Seeing the derailed train cars in the river was a sight I will never forget. We got very close and took a lot of pictures. I have wondered if it is possible that what I heard was the sound of the train derailing. The home was about 25 miles away from the bridge the train derailed from, so I suppose it's possible to hear something that far away when it's silent in the middle of the night. But the sound seemed to be coming from inside the house itself, and violently shaking only the wood stove and its pipe. And the coincidence of waking up in terror from my dream at that precise moment that the train derailed seems very unlikely. The banging sound following my dream of the hand coming around the door frame definitely felt like a supernatural threat, but who knows? Donna, I'm pretty sure we had the same experience in childhood. You know, being terrified by everything paranormal, but being equally interested in it, not willing to experience anything or witness anything, but being fascinated at the same time. And I do love a story where it turns out to be completely non-paranormal. I think they're so funny. Do you know, you're lying there and you're like, oh my God, the hat man's in my bedroom, and it's, you know, the coat that you left hanging over your door. We've all experienced it. But I imagine combined with sleep paralysis, that sounds pretty hectic. When I was reading it, I was thinking, you know, is it like a spectre pacing at the end of the bed and then sitting down on the chair to watch you sleep? You know, we get a lot of entities watching people sleep. No, just a jacket. That's all. And I'm also not going to lie. Like, I could listen to stories about your job in news production forever. I mean, right. First of all, unironically, I would love to get love hate tattooed across my knuckles. Right. I think it's kind of cool. That does not excuse your boss being generally a dick, but I do think love hate knuckle tattoos are cool. Okay. I would look like a knob if I got it done, because I am the least hardcore punk person in the world. And what a life Bobby had led. Do you know? Being a homeless person, living on the rails, almost died in a train car, and then a pastor being like, I got a feeling about this. And then randomly crossing a picket line, being in jail, then working in the newspapers, and then handing out Quaaludes willy-nilly. Like, I've seen Wolf of Wall Street. I know what Quaaludes do to you. And it sounds like him and Samuel had a really toxic relationship. Like, they fought all the time but still spent all their time together, and Samuel had an affair with Bobby's wife. Just crazy behaviour. And honestly, when you were standing turned and, you know, had that feeling of being watched and looked to the ground, and you could see the shoes, you can see the baggy khaki trousers, you can see, you know, a white button-down shirt, I wouldn't be looking any further either. That's enough. I've gotten the confirmation that I need. Thank you very much, you know. And I would be afraid of, like, if I look up, what am I going to see? And I'm so glad that your co-worker was there to experience that too, that you had somebody else that you could go, did you just fucking see that? And they could go, yeah, we did just see it. That was terrifying. And, you know, for some people, work is a place of, like, safety and security. And it is a place where, you know, maybe it's their only human interaction. Maybe outside of work, they don't have people in their lives. Like you said that Bobby was divorced. Maybe that's why he came back. Maybe he was, like, really super connected to that place and came back at that moment. Oh, I didn't like the Dome House ghost either. Oh, that really gave me the heebie-jeebies. I feel like the Dome House sort of was perfectly set up for weird shit to happen, with the layout of it and all of the weird paintings that had been put up in it, and, you know, a whole cupboard full of weird family portraits. That's the setting of a horror film. Oh, and the thought of, like, dreaming or not, it's still terrifying, the thought of a long creepy hand slowly emerging from the side of the door, grabbing the door frame, like, and coming into the bedroom. Shut up, go somewhere else. And the fact that it would have to be like taller than the average human, like, oh, Slender Man, go back into the forest and get a life. And maybe you did hear the train derailing, you know, maybe you heard it from that distance. But it is weird that it would only sort of shake the stove and the ventilation pipe. You know what I mean? That seems strange. Unless the stove and the ventilation pipe was like exactly on top of something that had absorbed the shock or the noise and it had travelled through, like some sort of underground pipe system. I don't know. And even if it was just an eerie coincidence, that's still pretty grim. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and thank you to Donna for sending in your story. Remember, this story came from August the 7th, 2024. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you can get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, we shall see you next time.
If there's one thing that my family and friends know me for, it's being an amazing gift giver. I owe it all to Celebrations Passport from 1-800-Flowers.com, my one-stop shopping site that has amazing gifts for every occasion. With Celebrations Passport, I get free shipping on thousands of amazing gifts. And the more gifts I give, the more perks and rewards I earn. To learn more and take your gift giving to the next level, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.